'cause this land's the place I love.
Little children, you better tell what you see.
Now I was paid off at the pool in the port of Liverpool.
Why there was this explosion of music in Liverpool at this particular time, no one really has a definitive answer. Perhaps its status as a port, absorbing people, goods and influences from all over the world, had something to do with it.
Now the first time I saw...
What is known is that by the end of the 50s, teenagers all over the city, inspired by listening to American R&B and British skiffle, were desperate to play music. The first step was usually to get a guitar, but affordable guitars were hard to come by in the city.
So I think I sent one for one out to Daily Mirror. I think John Lennon sent for the same one. They were made like orange box. I think they were made in Spain with 6 strings. They were virtually untunable. No scratch plate, because I remember getting a sheet of plastic to cut a white plastic scratch plate out and screw it on.
I was playing guitar at a very young age, you know, just the acoustic guitar and like learning all these pop songs. I used to sit on the top of the stairs in the house because it was all echoey, and I thought it sounded great.
The easy things that you could play, I found at that time, were the skiffle things. If you had a guitar and you knew 3 chords, you could play almost anything. I had the old beat-up acoustic thing. I used to stand on the corner in my hometown of Bootle, playing Lolly Donegan songs, Rock Island Line and things like that.
Down the Rock Island Line, she's a mighty good road. The Rock Island Line is the road to ride. Yeah, the Rock Island Line is a mighty good road.
Skiffle was like an American country western blues. And we listened to these songs like Rock Island Line. I thought, that's fabulous.
If you can imagine a tea-chest bass with a piece of string and somebody trying to make notes out of it, well, it was with a pinch of salt and tongue in the cheek, but people loved it because they were going out and they were dancing to it as well.
Once past the stage of mastering an instrument, even a washboard, came the difficult part of getting into a group. Ralph Ellis was approached to join an established trad jazz and skiffle band, the Blue Jeans.
And we stopped and we talked, and he said, "We're looking for another guitar player, singer. Would you be interested in joining the Blue Jeans?" Well, it took me about a third of a second to think about it and said, I'd love to. And that was probably one of the biggest thrills of my life, when I actually joined the Blue Jeans, and then I went and bought the Martini shirt and the light blue jeans. And I thought I was real cat's whiskers when I wore those.
The Blue Jeans were early leaders on the Mersey beat scene, but they played trad jazz. For kids a little younger, it was American R&B that inspired them.
I actually got the first record player in our house through a kind of rich aunt who had a sweet shop on a corner. But previous to that, I'd already been out and bought at least 7 or 8 records, which I could not play at all. I used to sit there reading labels. You know, night after night, just, you know, completely engrossed in the names, Little Richard and his band and all his other little names underneath.
Shack go down by the Union Hall when the dots start jumping. I have a ball, I'm gonna rock it up.
I was at a fairground with a couple of mates, and I still remember it to this day. It was Rip It Up by Little Richard, and it was like a smack in the mouth. It was like, you know, as soon as it started, oh, have that.
On the way back from school, I went to David's house, and he put on this record by a man called Elvis Presley, which was Heartbreak Hotel and Hound Dog. I went, oh, what is that?
When I heard Heartbreak Hotel and I heard the guitar sounds, I thought, how can we get these sounds? And I seen this guitar in the window. It was the most oddest looking guitar that I'd ever seen. It was 1 inch thick and it was like a plank of wood. But I liked it for the shape. It was an Antoria. But of course, I failed to realise with it not being a cello type guitar, you needed an amplifier to go with it. Well, the amplifiers again in 1958 were thin on the ground. So we made this amplifier up. It's like it had 2 valves in. It was in a cabinet 18-inch square, and I put a bolt of lightning across the front to make it look quite nice.
This interest in rock and roll led to a rash of bands being formed. Bobby Thompson got together with Stockport butcher's boy Ted Taylor to form the James Boys. Ted emerged as the frontman and acquired a new name.
He was a huge kid. He was absolutely massive. King-size cigarettes had just come out, and I made some crack about him being a king-size singer. Yeah. So I think I gave him the name.
So Ted Taylor became King Size Taylor and his band, the Dominoes. In Broad Green, Alan Caldwell changed his name to Rory's Storm, and his band became the Hurricanes. They were managed by Rory's mum, Vi.
We got quite good money because she was ruthless about the money. She said, they're not playing for that, you know. It was like when George Harrison in the early years in 1958 or 59 asked to join us, and she opened the door. And I can always remember this because we were rehearsing either under the stairs or in the hall. And he said, I brought my guitar, I'd like to, I heard Rory's looking for a guitarist. And I said to him, look son, you're too young, they're older than you. They're too old for you, son. And shut the door. And that was the end of it, like, you know. We could have had George Harrison in the band, you know.
One fine day, along came this fella, John Hutchinson, who lived round the corner. And I didn't know at the time, but he was in a band called Casson and Casanovas. And they were looking for a bass player. So he said to me, can you play the bass guitar? I said, certainly. Having no idea at all, not ever having seen one. And for this first gig, I got £2. And the wage then was only like £2, 10 shillings. And I thought, £2 for 1 hour? This is it.
Brian Jones was invited to join yet another new band, the Vegas 5.
Jeff knocked on the door and asked me if I sang. And I said, yes, I do. So he said, would you like to join a band as a singer? So I said, well, I've just bought this tenor saxophone yesterday. So he said, well, bring that along and, you know, play that, which was ridiculous, really, because I'd only had it a day.
So he came in and he brought the sax along. Well, it was bloody awful. But he was a good singer. So we kept him on.
I used to sing a third of the songs. There was three singers in the band. So when the other two singers were doing their songs, I used to sort of honk in the background on one note. And then the next night I might get a bit more adventurous and sort of start honking on 2 notes.
The band began advertising in the local paper to get gigs.
We actually bought the paper that evening to see if our name was in it. And we saw this thing called The Undertakers, this band called The Undertakers. So we didn't see our name, the Vegas 5, advertised. So we phoned up the agent and he said, oh no, there's been a misprint. If you look in the funeral column, the Vegas 5 is in the funeral column and the Undertakers is in the actual gig that we were doing. So just before we went on, we learnt the Death March in the dressing room.
And then straight into Johnny B. Good, and that then was the advent of the Undertakers.
Hey, baby, come on, baby. Might be oh, yeah. All right, whoa, baby.
We used to do a song called The Monster Mash. And then the thing is, the crowd started getting used to me coming out of the coffin. So what I used to do, I used to sneak round the back, and they used to anticipate me coming out of the coffin, but I'd come from behind and I was dressed up as a monster.
You go back to a gig you'd done, say, 6 months before at one price as the name of another band, and you go in as the Undertakers, doing marginally the same type of material, and you come, and they used to say, "Oh, you come?" I said, "Yeah, but look at the show you've had." Totally different show to what you got as the Vegas 5.
I was still working in the butchers at that time, and I was able to get lots of props from the butchers, like a tin of sheep's eyes. I used to throw these eyes at people, and the next thing is you'd see these girls walking around with like 3 eyes. One, like the eyes would be stuck in the middle of the forehead.
Like I used to sing numbers like I Remember You, and Jackie used to sing When I Fall in Love. So, you know, we were very sort of, I suppose you'd say commercial band in those days.
In this vibrant scene, bands were constantly evolving. Cass and the Casanovas became the Big 3, one of the stalwarts of Mersey beat.
Adrian had seen this political headline in the paper. You know, I think it was probably Khrushchev and whoever they were, the big heads of state of those guys. Big 3 meeting in somewhere, New York or something. And he went, that's it, we're all quite tall, about 6 foot tall or something like that, and that's it, the Big 3.
Oh, they were great, you know, I mean, Johnny Hutch on drums, you know, he's a great character, and Griff on guitar, and Johnny Gus on bass. Oh, he's singing Little Richard numbers. I just stood there with my gobbo, bloody hell, that's great, he's going, that. You know, he was. They were a very good band.
I stick in the black lap off my pride, oh now, some of the guy now, well, it got the best girl I ever had, oh, and I'm a lonely one, lonely as I can be, oh, now.
Names were all important. Rory Storm, leader of the Hurricanes, forced his musicians, one of whom was a young Richard Starkey, to change their names.
He was already Rory Storm, but we were the Hurricanes, so he said, you can't have names like John Byrne or Richard Starkey. The names have got to be changed. I'd seen the old Peggy Lee film, Johnny Guitar, so I said, that'll do me, I like the sound of that.
Play it again, my Johnny.
And Ringo used to wear the rings and that. We said Ringo Starr. And they said, oh, if we call these names, this is Liverpool, it's a bit sicious and people will skit us, you know. I said, don't worry about that. Those names, so that was the names that we took and we stuck to them, you know.
With the right names in place, Rory set about becoming a local legend.
Hey, all you women, don't come around.
He'd get down to the girls on the front, sit on the front of the stage. He'd get a giant comb in the middle of a number, just stop, comb his hair, you know, sure the sideboards are all right.
Well, I can tell by the way that you look at me.
We were in Birkenhead in a place called the Majestic Ballroom, and he'd go into the box and do a song, and then he'd stand on the edge of the box and try and jump from the box back onto the front of the stage. Now, you were talking, well, a good 20 foot. Now, he did it a few times, but one time he done it, and he broke his leg. He had to be carted off. Another time he broke his arm. He wasn't afraid. He had how could I put it? He didn't have any nerves.
Why, no, you don't love me no more.
While Rory was creating a reputation for himself, a young kid who worked on the railways was trying to come up with a name for his band.
I was sitting home one day and I thought, hang on a minute. Mars from Marsden and Bars of Music. We'll call ourselves Jerry Marsden and the Mars Bars. Oh, yes, that is a good rock and roll name. My dad wrote to the Mars Bar Company. Said, can my son use your name? And they wrote back, no, how dare he? It's a trade name, he can't use the Mars Bars. So he changed it. I was watching television one afternoon and they had an athletics meeting up. The guy said, the pacemaker in this race. And I thought, oh, this is the name? The Pacemakers. What a great name for a band.
Whole lot of shaking going on.
Another Mersey Beat staple, the Searchers, were in the process of forming.
John and I were sort of the mainstay. We'd get together. We were the two guys who got together either in his house or my house, and we'd play lots of instrumental things, you know. I'd play the lead, John would back me up on the rhythm guitar. I went to a pub called the Cross Keys. It was pretty well attended. It was packed all the time, especially at weekends. And I was in there one Saturday night, and there was a guy up on stage singing Elvis songs, and I thought, he's pretty good, you know, he's got the actions. And this is Tony Jackson.
Tony Jackson teamed up with the other two, initially as a guitarist.
As I was the only one in a full-time job, I was designated to be the bass player because I was the only one who could afford a bass guitar.
For a drummer, they turned to Chris Curtis, who was to broaden their musical horizons.
We couldn't get over, the three of us, Tony, John and myself, the record collection that Chris Curtis had. He'd come up with all these songs. Yeah, it sounds great, let's rehearse that.
And Chris used to stand up, he never sat down, he stood up. And he was wild.
She knows how to say that thing all right. Yeah, I know. All right. Yes, yes. Tell your mama, tell your pa, gonna send it back and knock it down, oh, baby. That's what I'm on now. That's what I get, child. Whoa, hit it, come on.
One of the biggest stars of Mersey Beat was Billy J. Kramer. He started out as plain William Ashton and had never wanted to be a frontman.
We had another singer, but then he decided that he didn't want to be in the rock and roll business, and He opened a hairdressing shop and left the band, and then the band sort of pushed me into being the singer, and I had no experience whatsoever. I would have been quite happy to strum the guitar and stand behind somebody else.
There was over 250 bands in Liverpool at that time, and every one of those bands used to play in clubs in Liverpool on a Saturday night. I think there was more people in bands than what there was audiences.
I don't think there was a band out of work on a Saturday night. And you used to do 2 or 3 gigs a night, you know, in those days. Like we'd do the Craftsman's in Ellesmere Port, come back down and do the Otter Park Ballroom, and then do an all-nighter at the Iron Door.
Well, it's Saturday night now, just got paid. Full about my money, though, trying to save.
Ballrooms, clubs and town halls were all regular venues on the scene, but one place became inextricably linked with Mersey beat.
There was a club called the Cavern, which was in town, which was a jazz club. And we thought it'd be nice to get down and play there, you know, instead of just jazz, play some rock. So we went to a guy called Ray McFall, who was the boss. And one afternoon he said, OK, come and do an afternoon session for me over Wednesday. We did it. And it was such a success that the jazz club suddenly stopped playing jazz and played rock and roll.
We've got a dance in Liverpool. The cats and chicks, well, they think it's cool. It started off with just a romp. Now they call it the Cavern Stomp.
There was holes in the floor. You had to watch where you were going. You know, your leg would go down a hole somewhere, like broken ankle as you were trying to dance, you know.
It had that certain sort of atmosphere, and also your clothes smelt of the cavern. My late mother always used to say, "You've been to that cavern place, haven't you?"
Bob Wooler was there. He was the compere, as he was around Liverpool on lots of venues. He was the man, Bob Wooler.
He was the guy that coined it, the best of sellers, he used to call it, you know. And did a lot of other gigs too around the local dance halls and all that, you know. We had a great style.
This is Bob Wooler saying, welcome to the best of sellers. We got the hi-fi high and the lights down low, so here we go with the Big 3 show.
In 1961, the local scene was in full swing. Then, more by accident than design, a whole new world opened up for Mersey beat bands. But it was several hundred miles from Liverpool.
All around the world, every boy and girl, you say go listen.
Pretty soon, all the Liverpool bands headed over to Hamburg, where they received more than a musical education.
Everything was open 4 o'clock in the morning. There were strip shows, people wrestling in mud, cafes open. In Liverpool, everything gets shut at midnight.
Horst Fascia, the manager of the Star Club, rough, been in jail for killing a man. He was a boxer, and he killed a man in the ring, and they jailed him for it. Great guy.
The way he used to speak, he said, tomorrow, he said, you go to the end of the Grocer Freiheit, and you turn right, and there's a gun shop, and you buy some gas pistols. And I said, what do you want gas pistol for? He said, because you fucking need them in Hamburg. And then they gave us this badge with Star Club written on. He said, you keep that badge in your coat everywhere you go in Hamburg, or you get killed. He said, but with that badge in, they know you work for Manfred and me, and no one touches you.
So we said to Kashmir, where's our hotel? He said, you don't have a hotel. This is where you live. I said, where? And it was 2 rooms at the side of the stage.
And you'd get a rota whereby you'd say, well, you know, you start at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and you've got 4 groups going on after you, and then you're on again at 12 o'clock midnight, and then you're on again at 4 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, whoever's got the last spot, like, you walking home to your hotel at 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning.
There used to be a lady that worked in the toilets, and she had like a little table on the door of the toilet, and he used to go up and used to say, have you got something for sore throat? And then she used to like give you these little Preludin tablets.
For 1 mark, he got 3. Well, that stopped you eating, great. And that stopped you drink. You didn't really want to drink, right? So it was cheap. So consequently, after 1 month playing at the Star Club, I came back 2 stone lighter and a nervous wreck.
one band that found Hamburg audiences less than enthusiastic was the swinging Blue Jeans, who at this stage were still playing trad jazz.
Well, the Germans, first time they played, were gobsmacked. They just looked. You know, they're totally gobsmacked at this. What's that?
I met my pretty bride down by the riverside, and we were really swinging, and the double bass was going, and Tommy was on the banjo, and it was really, really driving stuff that we played, and that they liked, but the German audience didn't understand it.
We had to lend them an electric bass, show them the technicalities of it, how to use the amp, and we wrote a list of songs out for them, and the banjo player was virtually redundant.
We were there for a month, and we couldn't go on playing trad jazz for a month, and he wouldn't give us our tickets to go home for a month, and so we changed to rock and roll.
Good golly, Miss Molly, yeah, you sure like the ball. Oh, good golly, Miss Molly, yeah, you sure like the ball.
The Hamburg experience sharpened every band up and was to move the scene one step closer to national prominence.
The big turning point, I think, for that scene was when the Beatles came back from Hamburg, because they came back in all the black leather gear. They looked to the girls. They had a great amount of sex appeal.
Just advertised his first appearance back from Hamburg, and they had the leather jackets on. The place was packed. The heat was terrific, and they went down a bomb.
The first time I saw the Beatles, I actually thought they were German, because a lot of people did. They were being billed as straight from Hamburg, because they were over there so much, and they looked so different to anybody else. The different hairstyles and all dressing in leather. But we thought, this is the place to go to. We need to go to Hamburg. And of course, there's no way we could have gone. We were just too young.
There's a great photograph somewhere of me and Tony at the Entry Institute, and Tony was still only 16. I was actually about 2 months before my 15th birthday. And we're trying to look, you know, dead cool and everything, with Coca-Colas with straws in.
We found that both of us liked the Everly Brothers. And when we tried singing together, we found out we could sound just like the Everly Brothers. So we think, well, this is a good basis for a band. So we called ourselves the Mavericks. And Bob Wallace saw us and said, I think you're absolutely wonderful, but you need to be launched and you need a new name.
So we went down to town, me and Tony, and okay, what's the name of it? What are we going to be called? He said, the Mersey Beats.
You came to me one summer night.
The Mersey Beats were the latest addition to a growing list of bands. In this competitive environment, poaching of good musicians by other bands was endemic, as Rory Storm was about to find out.
So the Beatles would stand at the side of the stage. Ringo was still playing with us. He was still our drummer. And they'd watch the shows because he was just so good, you know. He could put anything over.
I can tell, pretty baby, it's so plain.
It was at a holiday camp residency that Ringo Starr got a call.
We went up to the reception and Ringo picked the phone up. And he goes, yeah. Oh, yeah, great, yeah, okay, yeah. And he said, oh, does it have to come off, you know? Because they would tell him to shave the beard off. And he didn't want to, you know. Does it have to? Oh, he moaned about that, you know. Next thing, he put the phone down and he said, sorry, Bob, I won't be joining the Dominoes. I'm going to join the Beatles. So I said, you've cracked it, son. Because he knew they were going to be so huge, you know.
Instrumental in the Beatles' success was a young record shop owner, Brian Epstein, who became their manager. He set about signing as many of the other bands as he could.
Brian Epstein took them over, then he started casting his net a bit wider, Jerry and Scylla. And he took us over, and immediately it was no smoking on stage, no eating sandwiches, no beer, you know, on the piano and all of that. And you've got to dress more smartly, boys.
So I said, yes, Brian, we'll sign up for you. And all that meant to me was giving him the diary, not thinking really of fame. So, right, Brian, fill that, get us a few more quid. And if anything happens, we'll laugh it.
Brian said, Billy Kramer has a group called the Coasters and they don't want to turn pro. By this time, we were a professional band. He said, would you consider backing him, you know, because John Lennon has suggested that, you know, we approach you. So, to be quite honest with you, none of us were really up to back Bill because we thought, oh no, he takes Billy Fury off, you know. We want to be on our own, Brian. No, he said, no, the deal is for you to back Billy.
I don't think they were really into it. And they sort of, you know, he said, you can make your own records and back Billy on his records.
So the Dakotas backed Billy J. Kramer, an alliance that was to lead to success. When it came to recording, Epstein began suggesting songs for all of his acts, often trying them out on the Beatles first.
And Ryan rang me up. He said, Jerry, I think I've got a song for you. I said, oh, great. Smashing, what is it? He said, it's a thing called How Do You Do It? He said, the Beatles have just recorded it, but they don't want to do it. John said, no, it's rubbish. So John said to Brian Epstein, give it to Jerry, he'll do it. So Brian rang me. He sent me the acetate of the Beatles. I thought, yeah, that's a good song. Anything to get on a record.
How do you do what you do to me? I wish I knew. If I knew how you do it to me, I'd do it to you.
Brian rung me on the Tuesday, because we knew on the Tuesday the charts came out on Friday. Brian rung me and said, Jerry, how'd you do it's going to #1? I said, oh, bloody hell. Thanks, Brian. Put the phone down. My mum was in the back kitchen. I said, Mum. She said, what? I said, how'd you do it's gone to #1? She said, what does that mean? I said, I think it means we're nearly famous.
You give me a feeling in my heart, like an arrow passing through it. Suppose that you think you're very smart, but won't you tell me how do you do it? How do you do
Epstein used the songwriting talents of Lennon and McCartney to power the Mersey beat scene.
Brian gave us, like, Do You Want to Know a Secret? And it was just John Lennon singing Do You Want to Know a Secret on an acoustic guitar. And at the end, he sort of apologized for the quality of the song and flushed the toilet.
Billy bowed to pressure from Epstein, and Do You Want to Know a Secret became a hit.
Listen, do you want to know a secret? Do you promise not to tell? Whoa, whoa.
For his biggest hit, Billy revolted against Epstein and refused to record another Lennon and McCartney song, preferring his own choice, Little Children.
It was a song that I'd found myself. I believed in the song. Brian Epstein was totally against me recording Little Children, and even went as far as to say that I'd insulted the two finest songwriters in the world.
I'm telling you, little children, you better tell what you see.
Little Children, I think really was the best record we ever did. And it sounds terrible when you've got John Lennon and Paul McCartney writing your first 4 records. But a lot of problems with that because Brian didn't want us to do it. So I remember in the studio there was a lot of rows.
Like you around, I wonder what can I do around little children like you.
The Swinging Blue Jeans, returned from Hamburg and now a proper rock and roll band, got a deal with HMV and were given to staff producer Wally Ridley.
Wally Ridley was more a Ronnie Hilton type of recording manager. He was very much middle of the road, Roger Whittaker and that type of music.
Mr. Wally Ridley, the recording manager, controls the balance of the music so that the players will get the sound they really want.
For goodness sake, I got the hippie hippie shake.
When we came down with the Hippie Hippie Shake, he didn't rate that very much at all.
I got the hippie hippie shake.
He was saying he couldn't hear the words clearly, and Norman was saying, well, to hell with the words. People want to listen to the beat and they want the driving rock rhythm. The words are unimportant. And Wally Ridley was saying, well, he's been recording for years and it's the other way round.
For goodness sake, I got the hippie hippie shakes. Yeah.
When we did the first LP, we didn't have enough material. I can remember in the morning and before we broke for lunch, we said, well, that's all we've got. And Wally said, well, you can't have because the studio's booked for the day and it's very expensive. We said, well, you know, we'll have to come back. He said, well, you can't do that. You've got to use the time up. So we said, well, okay, you go off and have your lunch and we'll work some numbers out.
Sweets for my sweet, sugar for my
Next, it was the Searchers' turn to record, this time with Tony Hatch.
But I can remember going into the studios and we rehearsed the song, and I think we did it in 3 takes, all standing around one microphone. And I thought it wasn't perfect. But of course, Tony Hatch, he's up in the box and he's saying, "That's it, boys. We've got one. We've got a master." You know, we're saying, "We can do a better one." No, that's it. That's good enough.
Again, it was a hit.
I would chase that bright star nightly and try to steal it from the sky. And I would bring sweets for my sweet, sugar for my honey. Your first sweet kiss thrilled me so.
Right down through the history of rock and roll, if you find a band that has a success with one record, you'll always find that the follow-up is very, very similar. So anyway, Tony said, "I've got this song. A friend of mine has written it for you, blah, blah, blah." Great. And we did it. Sugar and Spice, sure enough, back up to the top of the charts. We actually found out later that Tony Hatch had written the song himself.
Sugar and spice and all things nice. You know that little girl is mine.
With this newfound success, the Searchers' flamboyant drummer, Chris Curtis, began to see himself as group leader.
Chris was the showman at the band. And because of that, although we were all equal guys and we all loved the same music and all that, Chris then began to get a bit, well, it's my band, you know, so I tell everyone what to do. And I think that's what the start of the friction was. And I walked in the studio, all set up, and he just walked up to me and said, "I don't want you to sing on this album, Tony. Your voice isn't good enough." Which, you know, I fell through the floor. I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, that's the polite version of what do you mean?" He said, "No," he said, "No, Michael's going to do it. Mike's going to sing, take all the leads. You're just playing bass." I said, "Well, look, I've been lead singer on 2 albums, 2 number 1s. And then he says, "I don't like the way you're playing bass. I want you to do it this way." So I blew my top, you know, and I said, "Chris," I said, "what the FNL are you on about?" I said, "You're the drummer in the band." I said, "You don't lead it." I said, "Why don't you stick to your drums?"
Tony lost out in the battle with Chris and was kicked out of the band.
Your dreams of fame have all come true. Now I'm just a no one next to you.
I was expecting, stupidly like that, when the news broke that I was out the band, I'd have a flood of phone calls, like from Hollies or anyone who thought I could do a job for them. "Will you join us, you know, Foremost or Mersey Beats or somebody?" But nothing came.
I wished him well, you know, I wished he would have made a big name. I mean, I didn't really want him to leave the band, but you get caught up in so many emotions in those circumstances.
Tony formed a band called The Vibrations, but even then couldn't escape his past in the Searchers.
My agent said, "No one's going to book you with that name. They've got to know it's you. You've got to use your name up front." I said, "Yeah, but I don't want to be." He said, "Well, you won't get any bookings if you don't." So it ended up as Tony Jackson and The Vibrations. But it was just going to be The Vibrations. But just to get the bookings, and so people could say, "Oh, yeah, Tony Jackson Searchers, you know, X or whatever. We'll go and see him."
While Tony struggled with a solo career, the Mersey Beats were taking off. Record companies were chasing them.
We won a recording contract with Decca Records. At the same time, Fontana Records had been up to Liverpool to see us working at the Cavern. So we literally had 2 recording contracts and we didn't know which one to sign.
So we went back then to Bob Wooler and asked his advice. And he says, "Well, a brand new label and you're one of the first acts that they've signed up, they're going to spend more time and more money on you than if you sign up with Decca, who've got countless number of acts. I think since they lost the Beatles, I think they signed almost everybody."
It's love that really counts. Believe me, it's love that really counts. And maybe...
The Mersey Beats, with 2 hits under their belts, were on the verge of greater things when they suffered a serious blow.
We started getting offers to go to Italy, to America, to Germany, to all these places. And Billy suddenly got very disillusioned with the whole thing, wanted to leave to open a hairdressing shop, and that was it.
Walk on through the wind.
For his third single, Jerry Marsden, against the wishes of Brian Epstein, decided to record a Rodgers and Hammerstein number.
We put it down, then George put the violins on and everything. And when I heard it, a week later I went in to listen to the tracks. And I went, ah! I said, oh, George, that's lovely. The string, I said, wonderful. He said, thank you. So Brian was there. And I said, that's the third record. Brian nearly had a heart attack. And we put it out. And it was the fastest one to go to #1.
And he'll never
Walk Alone became something bigger than I'd ever anticipated. Because at Anfield, they would play the top 10 records from the charts. So when Walk Alone was #1, the last record they played was the #1, just before the kick-off. And the DJ would play them, and he would get to Walk Alone, just before kick-off. And the Cop, which held in those days like 25,000 people, started singing it.
and he'll never
You know the best things in life are free, but you can keep the ball better bills. I want money. What I want, that's what I want. That's
Back in Hamburg, King-Size Taylor and the Dominoes would record numerous albums under different names. One was an album for Scottish singer Alex Harvey.
Alex come roaring round one morning. It's like about 10 o'clock in the morning. We'd be in bed about half an hour. I've got to do an LP today. Now, do you like that? I've got to do an LP today. Because it's supposed to be a live album. So at the end of every song that we did, as soon as we come to the end, we all went, hey! We all put our own applause on, see? And then done it again. They played the track back to us. And we put our own applause on again, and we were all whistling and banging bottles. And it came out, it sounded so live, it was wonderful. And it came out, it was Alex Harvey and his soul band live at the Top 10 Hamburg, when in actual fact it was Alex Harvey and the Dominoes out their heads in Polydor Studios.
In Liverpool, the Big Three were offered a recording opportunity, but the wrong choice of material scuppered their chances.
We were allowed to do an R&B tune for our first single, which was some kind of sop in the right direction, yeah? But from then on, it went downhill rapidly. Songwriters were brought in, Mitch Murray, and By the Way was brought up, this song By the Way, which the Beatles had turned down as being, awful.
I can tell that you're the one by the way you keep me thinking of you. Oh, by the way, I love you.
And some bright spark had finally realised that these tunes they're recording is not what this band is about. So they thought, we'll make an album, a proper 12-inch album of Live at the Cavern, which we did. We recorded 2 whole sets, one after the other, allowing for mistakes in the control room, with the tapes and etc. One More Time Boys and all this. Nobody paid to get in. It was packed, all screaming their brains out. They all knew us anyway. Bob Waller was there with his medicinal potions. And we did a whole album's worth, at least 2 takes of each track. And what they did, they erased it. They erased most of it, except for those 4 tracks, which were which were later called the Big Three EP at the Cavern.
When you see me in misery, come on, baby, stand by me, yeah. What I say, tell me what I say now.
Apart from that, we went to Decca Studios one day and recorded 4 or 5 other tunes, and they erased those as well. They lost them. Good, aren't they?
This run of bad luck, combined with poor decisions made by the record company, effectively ended the Big Three's career. The Mersey Beats, still without a bass player, were looking for someone with Johnny Gustafson's pedigree.
I had this idea, I wonder if Johnny Gustafson would leave the big three, because I believe they're not doing much.
I just thought they're in the charts and they're making lots of money, and why not, you know? Why not? So it was a touch mercenary, really, I suppose. Well, it was, of course it was.
If you turn around, it wouldn't be good. Folks would say she only did what she should. Don't turn around.
The money was supposedly good, but then again, things happened, don't they? And they had this manager named Alan Cheetham. Nice name, isn't it? You can guess the rest.
Just wishing and hoping and thinking and praying, planning and dreaming, her kisses will start. That won't get you into the heart. So if you're thinking how great to love is.
Johnny's time in the Mersey Beats was short-lived. Billy Kinsley, one of the group's founders, wanted back in.
And I was the last one in the dressing room, and they're all sitting there, like very sort of long-faced and quiet, which is very unusual. And I sat down, what's happening? And Tony said, it's not really happening, is it? It was a strange choice of words, because there'd just been this incredibly loud, for them, normal crowd reaction. And it was just, he had to say something, I suppose, which is, you know, I felt sorry for him later, years later. He had to try and explain. And they wanted Billy back. So, what can we say? You know, okay.
Billy J. Kramer's career was on the turn. His ability to choose the right material had seemingly deserted him.
Different writers have said in things that Paul McCartney never offered yesterday to anybody. But believe it or not, when I was doing that summer season in Blackpool, he played me Yesterday. And I said, I don't like it. I said, it's boring, Paul, and I want a rock and roll song.
The sun is fading away. That's the end of the day. As the June light turns to moonlight, I'll be on my way.
I would see things in the NME, like, where they'd have little goes at you, and it'd say, like, is Billy J. Kramer the ideal person to invite to your party? Because I've been drunk at somebody else's party the week before and insulted everybody, you know. Which, you know, it was a bummer, really.
I didn't like him very much. It's another reason why I left the band. He was drinking so heavily, and he was just abusive to everybody, including myself, and I just had enough. It just knocked all the stuffing out of me.
Some of the longest-running Mersey Beat bands were breaking up, a symptom that the scene was running out of steam.
We've been together for a long time. Don't say that you've never loved me.
I got very depressed about the whole thing, and I went through a pretty bad spell for a while. I'm worrying about what the long-term future was, and having come from a very insecure background, you know, what the future was going to be after the band. And then we started to have one or two problems between ourselves, as bands do. And they just said to me one night, well, look, you know, if this isn't really working out, we're not getting on anymore, it might be better if you leave. So that's how it happened.
Feeling better now that we're through. Feeling better 'cause I'm over you.
I finished completely, totally, altogether. I put my Strat in its case and I put it away. And it stayed there for 26 years. Then I got a job with the Prudential, and I thought, well, I'll give it 12 months and see how it pans out. And I stayed there 25 years.
We did what I thought was some pretty good albums, and they were acclaimed, and people said, yeah, I love your latest album, you know. They got on the album charts, which was great, you know.
Every time that you walk in the room.
Despite being the only band apart from the Beatles to have success in the album charts, the Searchers had nowhere to go but the cabaret circuit.
We left Pie Records, and we were at a stage whereby, what's the career going to be? And of course, we got into the cabaret scene, nightclub market, which is a good scene. You know, it's a good living. It gives you what you've been used to.
The whole Liverpool thing was sort of dying. This is 1965. We'd stopped having hits. The Searchers had stopped having hits. Everybody basically had stopped having hits except the Beatles.
The Mersey Beats signed a new deal, and their career was given a brief boost. But for the band and the scene, the writing was on the wall. A new generation of groups, inspired by the Beatles, were penning their own songs and stealing the thunder of the Mersey Beat bands.
I Stand Accused got us back into the charts. We made the top 20 again. But then after saying that, the two of the lads got disillusioned with everything.
We came up with a solution that Tony and I would actually leave the Mersey Beats and call ourselves the Merseys. And John and Aaron could carry on as the Mersey Beats. We realised we weren't just a Liverpool band, we had to compete with, you know, everybody else. It was a necessity, really, because there was no more Mersey Beat.
With your long blonde hair and your eyes of blue.
Mersey Beat was over. The Beatles had moved on, leaving the other bands playing cabaret. But for a few years in the mid-60s, Liverpool bands had ruled the world.
You're acting funny, spending all my money. You're out there playing your high-class games. Sorrow, sorrow. You never do what you know you ought to. Something tells me you're the devil's daughter. Sorrow, sorrow.